Agatha Raisin and the Case of the Silent Witness. Good evening, from a village where gossip travels faster than the post. I wonder from which part of the world are you joining us today? We do love hearing from our listeners near and far. And don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss when the next bit of mischief blooms. So let's get started. Chapter 1, A Whisper in the Village. Agatha Raisin stepped out onto the cobbled lane, the crisp morning air carrying the faint scent of dew on grass and freshly baked bread. The village of Carsley was waking slowly, as it always did, with the soft clatter of milk bottles on doorstep rails and the distant crow of a rooster somewhere beyond the hedgerows. Yet even in the gentle calm of dawn, something felt off. She furrowed her brow as she adjusted the scarf around her neck, scanning the familiar cottages with the keen eyes that had earned her an unwelcome reputation for noticing far too much. Mrs. Tilling, who lived diagonally across, was usually bustling about her front garden at this hour, trowel in hand, humming tunelessly to herself. Today, however, she stood very still, staring down at the roses with an intensity that suggested either deep contemplation or mild hysteria. Agatha's curiosity twitched. Mrs. Tilling never stood still for long. Something was clearly afoot. She made a mental note to inquire about the sudden, statuesque behavior at her first opportunity. Turning her attention down the street, Agatha spotted a car she didn't recognize. A sleek black vehicle, shiny as though it had just rolled off the lot, sat parked beside the tiny village shop, its engine humming softly. It was unusual. Visitors were rare in Carsley, and even rarer were cars that didn't seem to belong. She tilted her head, noting the license plate, the sheen of the paint, and the way the morning light caught the chrome trim. Someone new, or perhaps someone with secrets, she mused. The possibilities spun in her mind like a slow carousel, each one more intriguing than the last. Before she could delve further into speculation, Agatha noticed an envelope, cream-coloured and neatly folded, tucked under her front doormat. She bent down, retrieved it, and turned it over in her hands. No return address, no stamp, just her name, scrawled in delicate, almost feminine handwriting. The handwriting was unfamiliar, elegant in a way that suggested care, precision, and perhaps an underlying message she was meant to decode. Her pulse quickened with the familiar thrill of a puzzle waiting to be unravelled. She tore the envelope open carefully, though part of her wanted to savour the suspense a moment longer. Inside, a single sheet of paper bore a brief message. Not everything is as it seems. Look closer. No signature, no indication of sender, just those 5 words that seemed innocuous yet heavy with implication. Agatha raised an eyebrow. In her experience, when someone left a note that cryptic in a quiet village like Carsley, there was always more beneath the surface. She could almost hear the unspoken whisper of intrigue teasing her from the page. Pocketing the note, she moved along the lane, eyes darting to familiar sights that now seemed slightly altered. The bakery window glimmered with the golden reflection of morning sunlight, yet behind it she noticed the baker, Mr. Clark, pausing mid-slice of bread to glance furtively at the street, and at the small blue-painted cottage next door. Curtains twitched as though someone were peeking out, just long enough to catch a glimpse of her reaction. Everything felt slightly askew, as if the village had shifted imperceptibly in the hours she had been indoors. Agatha stifled a small, knowing chuckle. This was exactly the sort of morning she thrived on, ordinary on the surface, but layered with tiny, almost imperceptible oddities that only someone who looked closely would notice. Her mind began cataloguing each discrepancy, each subtle deviation from the norm, her imagination filling in stories that might explain them all. With a sense of alert delight, she stepped onto the lane leading to the heart of Carsley, the letter safely tucked in her coat pocket. The village seemed peaceful, quaint, and unassuming, but she knew better. Beneath its tidy facades and familiar faces, a secret waited, and Agatha Raisin intended to uncover it. This morning, with its quiet mysteries and tiny deviations, had just whetted her appetite. The game, as she always reminded herself, was afoot. A sharp knock at the door startled Agatha from her musings. She glanced at the clock just past 9 and frowned. Visitors were a rarity in Carsley at this hour, and most knew better than to appear unannounced. With a quick tug of her scarf and a glance at the envelope still in her coat pocket, she opened the door. A man stood there, small and nervously shifting from one foot to the other. His coat was threadbare but carefully buttoned, and his hat, though slightly crumpled, had clearly been pressed into service for an important occasion. His eyes darted around as if expecting someone, or something, to be lurking behind the doorway. "Good morning," Agatha said, keeping her tone pleasant but edged with curiosity. "Can I help you?" The man swallowed hard and coughed. I hope I'm not intruding. I'm Harold Finch. I live just a few streets over." He paused as though trying to summon courage. I should perhaps speak plainly. Something's happening in the village." "Something unusual?" Agatha raised an eyebrow, her pulse quickening with quiet anticipation. "Unusual, you say? Do go on." "Carsley is rarely without its quaint oddities, but rarely is anything serious." She motioned him inside. Sensing the urgency beneath his tremor, Harold stepped into the warm kitchen, wringing his gloved hands. He looked around nervously, then leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice. "I can't stay long. I don't even know if I should be here." His eyes darted toward the window, as if fearing a watcher. "But Ishti, you're the one who notices things, aren't you?" The subtle stuff? "You might be able to figure it out before it's too late." Agatha's lips curved into a small, amused smile. "You flatter me, Mr. Finch, but perhaps you should be more specific. What exactly is it that might be too late?" He shook his head, muttering something unintelligible, and then added, "I can't, not yet." Someone would know." His glance flicked toward the door again, more insistent this time. "Please just keep your eyes open. And listen, there are things people won't say, but they'll do. Watch for the small inconsistencies. You'll see." Before he could finish, a faint shout carried from the street, and Harold straightened in panic. I really must go," he stammered, retreating toward the door. Agatha, despite her curiosity, did not stop him. The man gave a hurried nod, tipped his hat awkwardly, and vanished down the lane before she could ask a single clarifying question. She closed the door and leaned against it, a wry smile tugging at her lips. The man had been vague, almost comically so, yet he had ignited that familiar spark of intrigue. The envelope in her pocket seemed suddenly less mysterious. Together they formed a puzzle she was itching to solve. Agatha grabbed her coat and stepped outside, her mind already cataloguing possible avenues of inquiry. First stop, the bakery. Mr. Clark was slicing bread, humming a jaunty tune, but his eyes flickered toward her with mild recognition, as if he too had noticed Harold's hurried passage. She asked casually about any unusual visitors or whispers, and though he offered only half responses, his nervous glances suggested he knew more than he was willing to admit. Agatha made a mental note to return later for a proper chat. Next, she drifted toward the village green, where a few early risers were tending their gardens or walking their dogs. Mrs. Tilling, now recovered from her morning stillness, waved distractedly, muttering something about lost cats and misplaced tools. Even in her mundane chatter, Agatha could detect subtle hints of unease, small inconsistencies in tone or gesture that hinted at secrets tucked just beneath the surface. She filed each observation carefully in her mind, knowing that in Carsley nothing was ever as simple as it appeared. By mid-morning the village had begun to hum with life, but Agatha moved through it with a quiet, deliberate purpose. Her eyes lingered on the familiar buildings, the patterned bricks of doorways, the glint of morning sunlight on windows, all while her mind spun webs of possibility. The nervous visitor, the cryptic warning, the vague air of secrecy, they were threads she intended to pull, gently but firmly, until the pattern of this morning's oddities revealed itself. With a soft chuckle, she adjusted her scarf, tucked the envelope safely into her coat, and continued down the lane, feeling the familiar thrill of anticipation. Carsley seemed peaceful, ordinary even, but she knew better. Something was stirring beneath its placid surface, and Agatha Raisin was perfectly poised to notice it. Chapter 2. Shadows Behind the Shop. Agatha pushed open the bakery door, the familiar jingle of the bell announcing her arrival. The scent of freshly baked bread and sweet pastries wrapped around her like a comforting shawl, yet she could not shake the faint prickling sensation at the back of her neck. Something in the air, subtle and almost imperceptible, suggested that this morning's ordinary routine was not entirely ordinary. Behind the counter, Mr. Clark, the baker, was bustling about as usual, sliding trays of warm scones onto the cooling rack. His flour-dusted apron hinted at the hours he had already poured into his craft, yet his eyes flickered toward the door more than once, betraying a distracted focus that Agatha could not overlook. She approached casually, offering a bright, "Good morning, Mr. Clark. Busy day ahead?" He glanced up, forcing a smile, but it faltered almost immediately. "Ah, Miss Raisin, morning?" "Yes, busy as always. Orders, you know?" His tone was clipped, as though each word had been measured before spoken. Agatha's gaze roamed the shop while she waited for him to regain composure, and that's when she noticed it. The sugar tin was slightly ajar, yet no sugar had spilled. Odd. Normally, Mr. Clark's meticulous nature would have left it perfectly aligned. Agatha's eyes drifted toward the counter, where a young assistant, barely more than a boy, whispered urgently to one of the patrons. Their heads were close, and though she could not hear their words, the way they darted glances around the room suggested secrecy. She tilted her head, intrigued, noting the patron's nervous fingers tapping on the table and the boy's anxious posture. Something was being shared, something not meant for general ears. Her attention shifted again to the corner of the bakery, where a half-hidden notebook peeked from beneath a chair. Its cover was worn, leather softened by age and frequent handling, and a small corner of paper protruded, suggesting hurried notes or sketches. Agatha's curiosity was piqued. Who had left it there and why? She could imagine a dozen scenarios, each more intriguing than the last, each thread potentially tied to the earlier visitor and the cryptic letter. As she moved closer to examine the notebook without seeming obvious, Mr. Clark returned, carrying a tray of rolls. "Careful, Miss Raisin. Don't want to knock anything over," he said, a little too sharply. His tone betrayed tension that seemed out of proportion for such a simple caution. Agatha made a mental note to inquire more discreetly later. Sometimes the smallest slip in behavior revealed far more than a direct confession ever could. She purchased a scone and a small loaf of bread, lingering by the window to observe the villagers passing along the lane. A mother tugged her children past, chatting idly, yet the youngest child kept glancing over his shoulder at something unseen. A delivery man wheeled his cart by, whistling tunelessly, though his eyes were fixed on the bakery's doorway, as if expecting or dreading something. Even the pigeons on the sill seemed unusually restless, fluttering in quick bursts. Agatha's mind catalogued each observation with care, fitting each detail into the larger picture she was beginning to assemble. The sugar tin slightly ajar, the whispered conversation, the half-hidden notebook, the patron's subtle tension. None of it alone meant much. Together, however, these minor anomalies suggested that someone was either planning, hiding, or waiting. The puzzle was delicate, almost imperceptible, but it was there for those willing to notice. Pocketing the scone, Agatha smiled inwardly. Carsley's charm was in its quiet facades, and the little oddities tucked beneath, the minor eccentricities of villagers and their routines. She was certain that today these small anomalies would lead somewhere, perhaps not immediately, but eventually. Each observation was a thread, and she intended to follow them until the pattern revealed itself. With a soft sigh, she stepped back onto the street, the warmth of the bakery still lingering on her hands. Carsley might appear serene and orderly, but beneath the everyday rhythms mysteries stirred, waiting for someone with a sharp eye and an eager mind to notice. And Agatha Raisin, as always, was ready. As Agatha strolled further down the lane, Her mind replayed the oddities of the morning, the cryptic letter, the nervous visitor, the bakery's subtle tensions. The village seemed calm, almost serene, yet she knew better than to trust appearances. It was then that she noticed a figure sitting quietly on the low stone wall by the edge of the green. A man, or perhaps a woman. The hood of a threadbare coat obscured most of the face, was hunched over a small sketchbook, pencil moving with deliberate, precise strokes. The figure seemed oblivious to her presence, absorbed entirely in the paper before them. Yet Agatha could tell they were alert, scanning the surroundings with sharp, intermittent glances, as though committing every detail to memory. The way the head tilted, the eyes flickering toward passing villagers, the subtle twitch of a hand, all spoke of someone who noticed everything but said little. A silent witness. Her pulse quickened. This was exactly the sort of person who held threads of information no one else would volunteer. Agatha slowed her pace, taking care not to draw attention. She watched the sketches on the page, glimpsing vague outlines of cottages, alleyways, and perhaps even the bakery, where she had just been. Each line was precise, deliberate, and carefully shaded, hinting at observations that went unnoticed by casual eyes. Who was this person? Why had they taken such care to record what seemed like trivial village details? And more importantly, what did they know about the subtle disturbances that had punctuated her morning? She took a cautious step closer, pretending to admire the flowers near the wall. The figure glanced up briefly, just enough to acknowledge her presence without breaking the rhythm of their work. There was no fear, no defensiveness, only a quiet intensity that suggested a mind perpetually analyzing, forever noting, forever connecting the invisible dots. Agatha's own mind began matching this silent observer's apparent interest with the small anomalies she had catalogued. Mrs. Tilling's sudden stillness, Harold Finch's nervous departure, Mr. Clark's tense glances, the sugar tins slightly ajar. Perhaps this witness had seen connections that even she had missed. Curiosity danced through her, tinged with the faintest thrill of anticipation. Agatha's gaze lingered on the notebook as the pencil flicked across the paper, recording shapes she could only guess at. The lines seemed innocuous, a cottage, a tree, a figure in the distance, but the way they were drawn suggested importance, details that mattered, observations that could unlock hidden truth. She wondered if the person had noticed Harold Finch's arrival, the whispered conversations in the bakery, or the cryptic letter under her door. Her inner detective began weaving possibilities, her mind alive with hypotheses. Perhaps the silent witness was aware of a scheme or danger that no one dared speak aloud. Perhaps the sketches contained subtle clues meant for someone perceptive enough to see them. Agatha felt the familiar thrill of a puzzle she was uniquely positioned to solve. She had to engage with this witness carefully, gently, so as not to scare them away, yet find a way to understand what they had noticed. The figure paused, lifted their head, and glanced directly at her for a moment longer than before. Agatha offered a small, reassuring smile, nodding ever so slightly, a silent acknowledgement of shared understanding. The pencil twitched, then resumed its work. She realized then that the witness would communicate in observation, not words, in subtlety, not speech. And that understanding, this silent, meticulous mind, would be key to unraveling whatever was stirring beneath Castley's placid surface. With a soft, almost imperceptible breath, Agatha stepped back, letting the figure remain undisturbed, yet committing every nuance of their behavior to memory. The quiet anticipation hung between them like the early morning mist, fragile yet electric. There was more to discover here, more to understand, and Agatha Raisin was determined to notice it all. Chapter 3. Secrets at the Tea Room. Agatha pushed open the door of the cosy kettle, her favourite tea room, and was immediately greeted by the comforting aroma of freshly brewed tea, warm scones, and the faint, lingering sweetness of jam. The polished wooden tables gleamed in the afternoon sun, filtering through lace-curtained windows. The room was bustling in its quiet way, local women chatting over teacups, a gentleman leafing through the newspaper, and the faint clatter of silverware from the counter, where Mrs. Penrose, the proprietor, moved with habitual grace, settling into her usual corner table by the window, Agatha observed her fellow villagers with a practised eye. Mrs. Bartlett, seated 2 tables away, leaned in close to her companion, lowering her voice so only a few words escaped. "I don't think anyone should know yet, but you saw, didn't you?" The other woman nodded quickly, then darted her eyes toward the door, as if fearing overhearing ears. Agatha made a mental note. Something was being shared here, though neither would admit the full story. Her attention shifted to the tea tray as Mrs. Penrose approached. "Darling, same as always?" she asked cheerfully. Agatha nodded, savouring the familiar ritual. The tea was poured with careful precision, steam curling lazily into the sunlight, and the scone arrived on a delicate plate with a tiny dab of clotted cream on the side. It was all delightfully ordinary, yet she knew that beneath ordinary surfaces, tiny irregularities often hid the most interesting truths. As she sipped her tea, Agatha noticed Mr. Jenkins, the local postman, balancing precariously on the edge of his chair while muttering about misplaced letters. One hand rested on a napkin folded just so, yet his sleeve was smudged with ink, as if he had been rifling through correspondence in a hurry. Agatha's eyebrows arched. Was it mere distraction, or had something arrived that should not have? She made a note to inquire later, perhaps when the postman was less flustered. Across the room, a child dropped a spoon clattering onto the tiled floor. The sound caused a flurry of minor reactions. Mrs. Bartlett squeaked in alarm. The gentleman by the window glanced over, and the waiter stumbled slightly, sending a sugar cube rolling. Agatha suppressed a smile. Even in the midst of small chaos, subtle truths revealed themselves. Gestures, reactions, and the minutiae of human behaviour were as informative as any spoken word. Her gaze returned to the corner where the 2 women whispered. One of them brushed crumbs from her sleeve nervously while speaking, and her companion's hand hovered over her cup as though to intercept something unspoken. Agatha noted the tiny details, the way one foot tapped in rhythm with a hidden anxiety, the way the other hand held the teacup at a peculiar angle. These were not accidents. They were signals, indicators of unspoken concerns, little breadcrumbs leading to a larger story. From her vantage point, Agatha also observed table arrangements, the slight tilt of a chair, the careful spacing of chairs and cups. Even the angle of the napkin folds seemed deliberate. Each choice suggested priorities, subtle power dynamics, or concealed intentions. She found herself amused, mentally cataloguing these observations with the same intensity one might reserve for a criminal investigation, yet all within the cosy ambience of afternoon tea. By the time her scone was half eaten, Agatha had gathered an impressive mental dossier, half confessions, suspicious gestures, conflicting statements, and subtle clues that hinted at more than the casual chatter suggested. The village, with its quaint charm and predictable routines, was alive with secrets waiting to be uncovered, and she was perfectly positioned to notice them. Finishing her tea, Agatha allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. The afternoon had been leisurely, light-hearted and amusing, yet beneath it all she had uncovered threads that would weave into a larger tapestry of intrigue. She rose from the table, tucking her notebook into her bag, ready to follow the leads that whispered beneath the surface of Carsley's sunny, seemingly peaceful streets. Agatha had barely left the cosy kettle when a sudden ripple of unease ran through her. A commotion near the end of the lane caught her attention. Villagers were gathering, whispering, and pointing toward a narrow alley beside the old smithy. Her sharp eyes immediately picked up a few anomalies. A small scarf fluttering against the iron gate, half open as though someone had hurried through, and a faint, muffled sound from earlier that now made sense in context. Something, or someone, was missing. She moved closer, weaving carefully between the concerned onlookers. The scarf was fine wool, patterned with subtle stripes, and unmistakably feminine. Agatha crouched slightly, brushing it with a gloved hand, feeling the delicate fabric, and noting the way it had caught on a low iron spike. Whoever it belonged to had passed here in haste, leaving traces behind like breadcrumbs. The gate creaked gently in the breeze, still swinging slightly as if disturbed only moments ago. "Mrs. Faraday," a villager cried, eyes wide with worry. Agatha looked up and recognized the speaker as old Mr. Pritchard, whose morning walks often took him past the alley. "She's gone! Caroline Faraday!" She went out for errands and never returned. His hands trembled slightly, a mix of fear and disbelief. Agatha's mind raced, cataloguing every detail. Caroline Faraday was a quiet, reliable woman, unlikely to vanish without explanation. Her absence, combined with the subtle clues left behind, suggested something unusual. Agatha's pulse quickened with the familiar thrill of detection. Missing persons were never just about the disappearance itself. The environment always spoke volumes if one cared to observe. She glanced around the alley. There were no footprints in the soft mud besides Caroline's earlier tracks, but a small imprint suggested someone, or something, had brushed against the low stone wall. A stray button, dark and plain, lay half hidden beneath a creeping vine. Even the smell of the lane was different, a faint whiff of damp earth mingled with the sweet, lingering scent of lavender from Mrs. Faraday's favourite handkerchief. Each detail hinted at movement, hesitation, or perhaps an unspoken struggle. Agatha crouched briefly, examining the gate more closely. The latch was intact but slightly bent, evidence of a hurried passage. She noted the direction in which the gate swung back and forth and connected it to the scarf's placement. A pattern, subtle yet clear to her trained eye, was emerging. Whoever had passed through was careful but not meticulous, leaving a trail that spoke both of intent and uncertainty. Voices of the villagers drifted in fragments around her. Did anyone see her leave? No, she was just... Something's not right. Agatha's ears picked up every nuance, hesitations, overlaps, contradictions. These were all clues in themselves, revealing more about human reactions than the event itself. She made a mental note to speak with witnesses individually later. Group panic rarely told the full story. With a deep breath, Agatha stood and surveyed the surrounding buildings. A small window above the alley caught her attention. Curtains slightly parted, shadows moving beyond. Someone was watching, or perhaps hiding. The afternoon sun cast elongated shadows across the cobblestones, exaggerating movements and creating false impressions. Yet she sensed no misjudgment on her part. Observation, she reminded herself, required patience, attention, and a willingness to trust subtle signals. By the time she took a step forward to investigate further, Agatha's mind was already weaving theories. Caroline Faraday's disappearance was the spark, the first tangible evidence that something deeper was stirring in the village. Her eyes, trained to notice the nearly imperceptible, scanned for any additional anomalies, footprints, displaced objects, unusual sounds. Every detail was a potential thread, and Agatha Raisin intended to follow them all. The villagers, still murmuring and wringing hands, stepped aside as she moved with calm determination. The quiet charm of Carsley remained intact, yet beneath its placid surface, tension rippled through the streets. The game, Agatha thought, was no longer merely observation. It had begun in earnest. Chapter 4. Clues Under Candlelight. The evening air was crisp as Agatha approached Caroline Faraday's cottage, the last rays of sun fading behind the rolling hills. A soft glow from the windows suggested warmth and domestic routine, but the faint creak of the gate and a slightly ajar front door immediately caught her attention. Something in the familiar scene seemed displaced. The scent of lavender lingered, faint but unmistakable, mingled with the subtle hint of beeswax from recently lit candles. Agatha's pulse quickened, not with alarm, but with the gentle thrill of discovery. She entered cautiously, letting her eyes adjust to the flickering candlelight. Shadows danced across the walls, elongating the familiar shapes of furniture and household ornaments. The room was tidy, almost unnervingly so. Yet there were subtle anomalies: a chair pulled slightly forward from the table, a teacup left in mid-use, and papers scattered in a pattern that suggested hurried handling rather than casual disorder. Agatha moved closer, inhaling the delicate aroma of lavender, sensing that every detail could be a clue. On the mantelpiece lay a small stack of notes, folded neatly, but not yet put away. Agatha picked up the topmost sheet carefully, noting the crisp edges and precise handwriting. The message was brief, almost cryptic. "Meet at the old mill, midnight. Bring the ledger." No signature, no name, only the careful scrawl that implied urgency and secrecy. Her mind catalogued every element: the choice of words, the time, and the reference to a ledger she had never seen. Each clue was like a soft pulse of intrigue, inviting her to connect the dots. Nearby, a small vase of flowers sat at an unusual angle, tipped just enough to suggest someone had handled it in haste. Agatha crouched, noting faint scratches along the tabletop, likely caused by the movement of objects. A candle flickered, casting a shadow that revealed a slight indentation on the floor, as though a chair had been dragged across the polished boards. The arrangement was deliberate, or at least informative. Someone had been here recently, and their movements left a subtle record for those paying attention. From the kitchen came a faint metallic clink, almost imperceptible, yet Agatha caught it immediately. She moved toward the sound, stepping lightly to avoid disturbing the delicate balance of objects around her. A drawer, slightly open, revealed another set of notes, small slips of paper with quick sketches, maps of streets and alleyways, careful notations of doors and gates, tiny symbols that might otherwise appear decorative but seemed to carry meaning. She recognized the style of someone meticulous, someone recording information not for public consumption, but for a particular purpose. Agatha's gaze lingered on the flickering candlelight, casting golden highlights on the wooden floorboards. Each shadow, each shimmer of light on the objects around her, revealed subtle cues: a misplaced key, a footprint pressed lightly into the rug, a corner of paper caught on a chair leg. Her mind began assembling the pieces, weaving the sensory details into a coherent pattern. The missing villager's actions were faintly mapped in these traces, waiting for her to interpret them. She paused in the center of the room, inhaling the mingled scents of lavender and candle wax, feeling the gentle tension of anticipation. The room itself seemed to speak, its quiet order concealing hurried activity and whispered intentions. Agatha's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. This was the type of investigation she loved: subtle, intricate, and immersive, where every detail mattered, and the ordinary became extraordinary under careful observation. As she carefully replaced the notes and stepped back, Agatha felt a quiet satisfaction. The evening had provided more than just clues. It offered a sensory map of movement, intention, and secrecy. Candlelight, scent, and subtle arrangements had revealed more than words ever could. And though the larger puzzle remained unsolved, she knew that each discovery brought her closer to understanding the threads weaving beneath the placid surface of Carsley. With a final glance, she turned toward the door, determination sparking in her mind. There were more pieces to find, more secrets to uncover, and Agatha Raisin was ready to follow them wherever they led. Agatha climbed the narrow staircase to the attic, the worn wooden steps creaking beneath her careful footsteps. The room smelled faintly of aged wood and dust, a comforting blend that somehow seemed appropriate for secrets long hidden. Sunlight filtered weakly through the small, grimy window, illuminating motes of dust that danced lazily in the air. The attic was small, cluttered with forgotten furniture, trunks and boxes stacked haphazardly, but Agatha's trained eyes immediately began scanning for details. She opened the nearest trunk, lifting the lid with a soft creak. Inside lay bundles of letters, tied with faded ribbons and smelling faintly of old paper and ink. Some envelopes were yellowed with age, corners frayed, others carefully preserved with neat handwriting still legible. Agatha untied one bundle and leafed through the letters, noting names that were familiar from village gossip, as well as some that had long vanished from conversation. The connections she began to discern hinted at old disputes, alliances, and grudges buried beneath Carsley's calm surface. One letter, dated over 20 years ago, caught her eye. The elegant script detailed a dispute over property boundaries, but beneath the polite phrasing, Agatha could sense simmering resentment. Another letter, slightly crumpled and tucked inside, mentioned a secret meeting between two villagers at the very mill referenced in the notes she had found earlier. Her pulse quickened. The past and present were aligning in subtle ways, revealing a continuity of intrigue that stretched across decades. She set the letters aside and opened a small, dust-covered journal, its cover cracked and faded. Inside were cryptic entries, short phrases and symbols she could not immediately decipher, but patterns emerged as her eyes traced the pages, references to meetings, to hidden messages, and to things left where no one would think to look. Some pages contained quick sketches of cottages, paths, and gardens, their lines reminiscent of the notebook she had glimpsed earlier in the bakery. Agatha's mind raced with possibilities. Someone had been recording events meticulously, connecting people and places in a hidden network of observations. A trunk at the far end of the attic yielded even more intrigue. Agatha lifted an old photograph carefully, revealing a group of villagers at what seemed to be a summer fete from decades past. Faces she recognized, though older and younger, stared back with expressions that ranged from mirthful to oddly tense. A folded note slipped behind the photograph caught her attention. It read simply, "Trust is earned, not given. Watch who listens." The ambiguity was tantalizing, suggesting secrets kept not just for a moment but for years. Agatha leaned back against the slanted roof beam, surveying the collection of letters, notes, and photographs. The attic felt like a repository of hidden narratives, each object a fragment of a story that connected past conflicts to current tensions. Her fingers traced the faded ink and rough edges, feeling the weight of history in a way that added depth to the present mystery. She realized that understanding these old conflicts would be crucial to unraveling Caroline Faraday's disappearance and the quiet undercurrents. Stirring within the village, a faint draught stirred the pages, and Agatha smiled to herself. Even in dusty, quiet attics, the village whispered its secrets. Every letter, every sketch, every cryptic note was a thread, waiting for someone perceptive enough to weave them into understanding. She felt a quiet satisfaction in the process, the thrill of discovery tempered by the cozy calm that only a small village like Carsley could provide. Carefully, she gathered the letters and notes, arranging them in chronological order in her bag for later study. Candlelight would illuminate her next step, but for now the attic had spoken in quiet fragments, secrets of the past that illuminated the present. Agatha Raisin descended the stairs, her mind alive with the connections she had uncovered, eager to follow them further, and more determined than ever to piece together the intricate tapestry of Carsley's hidden life. Chapter 5. The Garden Conspiracy. The village garden was alive with late afternoon sunlight, casting dappled patterns across winding paths and rows of meticulously tended flower beds. Agatha strolled along the gravel lane, her eyes tracing the vibrant reds of roses, the soft yellows of marigolds, and the gentle blue of forget-me-nots. The scent of damp earth mingled with blooms, a heady perfume that reminded her why Carsley was both comforting and endlessly intriguing. Yet beneath the pastoral calm, her instincts whispered that today's serenity carried hidden undertones. Agatha paused near a small rose arbor where two villagers huddled, speaking in tones so low that their words were nearly swallowed by the rustle of leaves. She leaned slightly, pretending to admire a cluster of roses while her ears caught fragments. "Must be careful. Don't let anyone see." The ledger. The word ledger made her pulse quicken. It was the same term mentioned in the notes she had discovered earlier. Someone was moving pieces in secret, leaving small signals for those who knew where to look. A gardening tool leaned carelessly against a trellis, but Agatha noticed that its handle had been marked with subtle notches. She crouched to examine it, realizing that the pattern was deliberate, almost like a code or tally. Nearby, a watering can had been placed slightly askew, as if someone had used it to obscure a small token tucked beneath the rose's leaves. Agatha's mind catalogued each irregularity, sensing the presence of messages hidden in plain sight. She moved closer to the villagers, pretending to adjust a flower pot, and noted their gestures. One of them, Mrs. Pendleton, tapped a gloved finger repeatedly against her chin while glancing over her shoulder. The other, Mr. Hawthorne, shifted uneasily, brushing soil from his sleeve, and whispered a few more words that reached Agatha's ears. "Before sunset, can't be late." Watch the path. Each fragment added layers to a puzzle that only someone observant could begin to piece together. A soft breeze carried the scent of roses and lavender toward her, and she allowed herself a brief smile. Even in the midst of subtle conspiracy, the village's charm persisted. A squirrel darted across the gravel, scattering a few petals, and a robin hopped along the edge of a flower bed, tilting its head as if observing the scene with mild curiosity. Agatha's amusement balanced her tension. She knew the thrill of uncovering secrets could coexist with appreciation for the simple beauty surrounding her. She followed the edge of the garden to a small stone bench where another clue awaited. A folded piece of paper peeked from beneath a terracotta pot. She retrieved it carefully, noting the handwriting, neat, urgent, and unmistakably intentional. It read, "The meeting moves to the east gate, midnight. No one must know." Agatha tucked the note into her coat pocket, her mind already cataloguing the locations, timings, and participants hinted at throughout the garden. As she continued her walk, she observed other subtle irregularities, petals arranged in unusual clusters, a rake left with its tines embedded in the soil at an odd angle, a watering hose coiled differently than usual. Each tiny deviation seemed meaningless at first glance, yet together they formed a language of signals, a quiet communication among those in the know. Agatha's eyes sparkled with anticipation. Deciphering these cues would be critical to understanding the village's unfolding intrigue. She paused at the garden's edge, looking back at the blooms shimmering in the soft sunlight. The roses, marigolds, and forget-me-nots might have seemed purely decorative, yet they had become silent messengers, carrying hints of a plot she was beginning to unravel. Agatha Raisin adjusted her scarf, smiled faintly, and continued along the path, fully aware that the village's quiet beauty masked clever designs, whispered plans, and secrets waiting for her attention. The game, as always, was both delicate and exhilarating. Back in her snug sitting room, Agatha settled into her favorite armchair, a steaming cup of Earl Grey balanced on the side table. The soft glow of the lamp cast a warm circle of light across her papers, notebooks, and the various clues she had gathered over the past days. She reached for the small envelope that had arrived just before dusk, noticing that it bore no return address. The handwriting was precise yet unfamiliar, curling elegantly across the front, and a faint scent of lavender clung to the paper. With a careful flick of her wrist, she opened the envelope. Inside lay a single sheet of paper, densely packed with words, numbers, and symbols that seemed at first glance a jumble of nonsense. Agatha leaned closer, her sharp eyes scanning each line, noting the repetition of certain letters and the peculiar spacing between words. The code was subtle, sophisticated, and clearly intended for someone accustomed to observation and deduction. Her pulse quickened. This was no casual note. It was a deliberate message meant for her. She sipped her tea thoughtfully, considering the patterns. Numbers interspersed between letters suggested a simple substitution, perhaps a variant of the cipher she had encountered years ago in her amateur sleuthing days. Agatha began jotting possibilities in her notebook, each scratch of the pen a methodical step toward clarity. The thrill of the puzzle mingled with a low, simmering tension. Someone in Carsley was speaking in hidden language, and the content could shift the understanding of the entire situation. Line by line, Agatha began to decode fragments. One section hinted at the mill, confirming what she had already suspected from Caroline Faraday's notes and the villagers' cryptic warnings. Another portion suggested a name, or perhaps a description, carefully disguised within a string of innocuous words. Agatha's brow furrowed. The writer was clever, deliberately layering misinformation with truth. Each discovery sparked a rush of anticipation, like feeling a lock turn slowly on a hidden door. A paragraph near the bottom caught her attention. Symbols had been circled in pen, connecting seemingly unrelated phrases. The ledger speaks to those who watch the roses. Not all who tend are trusted. Agatha paused, leaning back in her chair. Her mind raced through the garden's observations, the subtle signals she had noticed in the arrangement of petals, the tools, and the whispered warnings. The letter was confirming her suspicions. There were multiple actors, each with their own motives, and someone was using coded communication to ensure only the perceptive would understand. She allowed herself a small smile, amused at the challenge. The letter's complexity was invigorating, yet it reinforced the stakes. The mystery ran deeper than a single disappearance or a series of petty village quarrels. Agatha's deductive mind catalogued each hint, considering the potential suspects, their connections, and their likely objectives. Even the choice of lavender scent was intentional, perhaps a signal to her, a subtle signature of the sender, or a clue to the letter's origin. Agatha set the letter carefully beside her notebook, her mind already racing ahead. Who had sent it? Why now? And what further secrets lay hidden in the familiar lanes, gardens, and cottages of Carsley? Every detail was a piece of a larger puzzle, and she was determined to see the full picture before the next move unfolded. The quiet warmth of her room contrasted sharply with the mental intensity she felt, blending the cozy and the suspenseful into a single, tantalizing experience. As the lamplight flickered across the page, Agatha Raisin traced her finger over the lines she had decoded, savoring the satisfaction of small victories while anticipating the next revelation. The coded letter was more than a message. It was an invitation to observe, to reason, and to uncover the intricate web of motives threading beneath the village's placid surface. She allowed herself a deep breath, letting the tension settle slightly before turning back to her notebook. Carsley's mysteries were far from over, and she was ready for every twist and whisper yet to come. Chapter 6. Shadows at the Manor. Agatha approached the looming silhouette of Holloway Manor, just as dusk painted the sky in shades of amber and violet. The stone facade, ivy-clad and slightly weathered, gave the manor an air of dignified secrecy. Windows glimmered faintly with the reflection of the dying light, while shadows pooled in corners and beneath eaves. Agatha's heart quickened with anticipation. This was a place long whispered about in Carsley, where hidden corridors, old scandals, and the faint scent of past intrigues lingered like ghosts. She pushed open the heavy oak door, and the hinges groaned in protest, echoing through the vast entryway. The scent of polished wood and wax mingled with something faintly musty, evidence of rooms seldom used. Agatha's eyes swept over the hall. Portraits of stern-looking ancestors stared down, their painted eyes seeming to follow her every movement. She allowed herself a small, wry smile. The manor's air of grandeur had always carried a promise of secrets for those willing to search. Candlelight from wall sconces flickered along the corridors, casting shadows that danced across tapestries and ornate furniture. Agatha moved cautiously, her fingers brushing along the banister as she ascended the wide staircase. Every step creaked under her weight, announcing her presence to the stillness of the manor. She had come armed with only a small notebook and a keen eye, prepared to notice details others might overlook. A faint draught whispered through a cracked window, carrying the scent of aged paper and dust. Her exploration led her to a narrow corridor behind the library. where the floorboards had a slightly uneven pattern. Agatha paused, crouching to inspect them. One board in particular rattled subtly when pressed, a different resonance than the surrounding planks. She pushed it gently, and with a soft click, a section of the wall swung inward to reveal a hidden passage. A thrill ran through her. Hidden spaces like this were the manor's way of preserving whispers of the past, secreted away from casual observers. The passage was narrow, candlelight from her small lantern illuminating its stone walls. The air was cooler here, carrying the faint odour of mildew mixed with lingering wood polish. Agatha stepped carefully, mindful of loose stones, and noticed faint scratches along the wall, as though someone had brushed against it repeatedly. Each mark was a silent story, hinting at clandestine movement and perhaps hurried retreats. The passage curved gently, leading toward an unknown destination, deeper within the manor. Halfway along, she stumbled upon a small alcove. Inside lay a collection of objects, an old brass key, a tarnished locket, and a folded piece of parchment with handwriting partially obscured by age. Agatha's fingers trembled slightly as she examined the locket, noting the initials engraved inside, which matched names she had seen in the letters discovered in Caroline Faraday's attic. The key, too, seemed designed for a lock not yet encountered, a puzzle waiting for the right moment and careful hands. A faint scuff echoed behind her, and Agatha paused, straining her ears. Nothing visible moved, yet the manor seemed alive with quiet reminders that it had secrets to reveal, if only one was perceptive enough to notice. She traced the passage with her lantern, observing the worn edges of the stone walls, the subtle indentations in the floor, and the faint aroma of candle wax and old paper that hinted at prior nocturnal visits. Emerging from the hidden corridor into a small study tucked behind the manor's eastern wing, Agatha's breath caught. Dust motes floated in the candlelight, and a desk bore signs of recent use, scattered papers, a half-burned candle, and a small journal open to a blank page, as if waiting for the next visitor. Every object was a potential clue, a silent witness to the manor's layered history of secrecy, intrigue, and the occasional scandal quietly buried behind polished walls. Agatha stood for a moment, absorbing the atmosphere. Holloway Manor was more than a building. It was a labyrinth of stories, each corner hiding whispers of the past. Her eyes gleamed with curiosity and determination. The secret passage had led her here, but she knew it was only the beginning of uncovering the manor's concealed truths. Every flicker of candlelight, every draught, every creak of the floorboards was a subtle invitation to notice, to deduce, and to follow the threads of mystery that wound through Carsley like an unseen, intricate tapestry. Agatha had barely stepped into the manor's drawing-room when she encountered Lady Beatrice Holloway herself, standing near a marble fireplace with an expression somewhere between surprise and mild embarrassment. The lady was mid-story, recounting a minor mishap from the day's household errands, when her words unexpectedly stumbled into confession. "And then, well, I suppose I ought not to admit this, but I may have, handled the ledger before anyone noticed," she said, cheeks tinged pink, eyes flicking nervously toward the ornate writing desk. Agatha's eyebrows lifted imperceptibly. The ledger. Every fragment of her investigation seemed to converge here, in this very room. She remained composed, though internally her mind raced, cataloguing possibilities and connections. Lady Beatrice, flustered yet oblivious to the significance of her admission, continued, fidgeting with a delicate lace handkerchief. "Only meant to glance at it, you understand. The arrangement seemed peculiar, and I thought, well, it might be nothing, but curiosity got the better of me." Suppressing a small, amused smile, Agatha inclined her head slightly. She had encountered many such accidental revelations in her career, confessions that seemed trivial but carried the weight of hidden truths. Lady Beatrice's words hinted not only at knowledge of the ledger, but also at a broader awareness of activities within the manor that might otherwise have remained unseen. Agatha mentally noted the precise phrasing. Curiosity got the better of me. It suggested both innocence and inadvertent involvement, a subtle window into her character and possible motives. While Lady Beatrice busied herself arranging a vase of wilting tulips, Agatha observed everything. The tilt of her head, the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers lingered near the ledger's location, all spoke of attention paid to things she had previously believed were private. Agatha's mind connected these cues with the cryptic notes and letters she had discovered, references to meetings, hidden movements, and subtle codes embedded in mundane interactions. The pieces, once scattered, were beginning to align. Lady Beatrice sighed softly, then added almost conversationally, "I suppose it's silly, but I did notice shadows moving in the corridors. Occasionally, the servants' footsteps seemed deliberate, and I wondered if someone was, well, watching." Her words floated casually, as if unrelated to the seriousness Agatha attached to them. Yet they confirmed her suspicions. The manor had layers of observation, secrecy, and interpersonal tension that stretched far beyond ordinary housekeeping. Agatha allowed herself a soft chuckle, the tension lightening momentarily. Even in the midst of serious inquiry, these small quirks, accidental confessions, fluttering hands, nervous pacing, added charm to her investigation. Lady Beatrice's inadvertent revelations offered both amusement and clarity, a reminder that human behavior often delivered more insight than deliberate statements. Agatha silently catalogued each detail. Knowledge of the ledger, awareness of movement, emotional responses, all invaluable to solving the puzzle. Of course, I had no intention of meddling, Lady Beatrice added hurriedly, glancing around as if the manor itself might eavesdrop. I merely observed what I could. Curiosity, you see, it seems to run in my family. She laughed lightly, though the sound was tinged with nervousness. Agatha, smiling politely, made a subtle note of her demeanour. The combination of candour, anxiety, and light humour offered a unique perspective on the manor's inner workings. As the conversation drew to a close, Agatha felt the narrative shift. Lady Beatrice's accidental confession had reframed her investigation, highlighting connections that had previously been abstract. The ledger, the hidden passages, the coded notes, all were now linked through human action, observation, and inadvertent disclosure. Agatha's mind mapped the possibilities, anticipating how these new threads might converge toward resolution. With a final nod, she left the drawing room, quietly savouring the satisfaction of a small breakthrough. The manor's atmosphere, layered with history, secrecy, and subtle amusement, had revealed yet another layer of truth. Agatha Raisin, ever observant, was now equipped with critical insight to follow the threads of intrigue toward the next stage of discovery, and perhaps toward answers that had long eluded Carsley's villagers. Chapter 7. Unravelling the Threads. Agatha settled at her writing desk in the quiet of her sitting room, the flickering fire casting gentle shadows across the stacks of notes, letters and sketches she had collected over the past days. The village of Carsley outside was calm, deceptively so, but inside her mind a storm of connections and possibilities was steadily forming. Each clue she had gathered, the coded letters, the silent witnesses' sketches, the whispers in the garden began to coalesce into a pattern, a puzzle that demanded careful assembly. She spread out her materials deliberately, the notes from Caroline Faraday's attic, Lady Beatrice's accidental confession, and the cryptic letter that had arrived just as the manor investigation intensified. The silent witnesses' sketches lay beside them, subtle and precise, capturing fleeting observations of people and movements that otherwise went unnoticed. Agatha's eyes darted between documents, tracing lines of connection and noting overlaps in time, place, and action. Each detail, once isolated, now contributed to a larger narrative. Her mind worked like a finely tuned clock, ticking through each scenario. The ledger, she realized, was central not just for its financial contents, but as a symbolic and practical hub of interactions within the village. Those who had knowledge of it, or access, were entwined in overlapping webs of curiosity, secrecy, and small-scale manipulation. Agatha tapped her pen thoughtfully against the edge of her notebook, cataloguing motives, partial alibis, and inconsistencies she had observed. Every gesture, hesitation, and whispered remark suddenly carried weight. The silent witness, previously a mere observer in her mind's theatre, now became a key player. Agatha reviewed the sketches again, noting how minor, almost imperceptible gestures, hand movements, body positions, and glances revealed interactions that other villagers thought unnoticed. The witness had captured subtle hints of tension and alliance, the invisible threads of intrigue that threaded through garden paths, tea rooms, and manor corridors alike. Agatha smiled faintly, impressed by the precision of someone who saw everything but spoke little. Layering the coded letter atop the witness's observations illuminated a remarkable convergence. References in the letter, once mysterious, now aligned with specific actions she had recorded, movement through the garden, the placement of objects, even timing of meetings hinted at within Caroline Faraday's notes. Each revelation did not merely clarify a single event, it illuminated relationships, intentions, and the delicate interplay of concealment and disclosure among Carsley's residents. She paused, letting the fire's warmth seep into her shoulders, and reflected on the villagers' behaviours, subtle inconsistencies in speech, brief hesitations and accidental admissions. Lady Beatrice's confession now seemed a linchpin, revealing the boundaries of knowledge and influence in the manor, while minor details, like the way a garden rake had been left askew or a scarf discarded in an alley, formed critical connective tissue in the larger story. Agatha's eyes sparkled with the satisfaction of intellectual assembly. The pieces were finally beginning to fit, yet despite the satisfaction, a quiet tension remained. Each alignment of evidence uncovered further questions. Who truly orchestrated the more deliberate movements, and who merely reacted to circumstances? Which villagers were complicit, and which were innocent observers? Agatha's mind darted through possibilities, anticipating reactions and weighing motives, balancing logic with intuition, honed over years of subtle detective work. By the time the fire had burned low, Agatha leaned back in her chair, surveying the meticulous array of evidence before her. The web of the village's secrets was no longer a tangle, it was an intricate design, each strand intentionally placed, yet still awaiting final resolution. She felt a thrill of anticipation, knowing that the next step would bring these threads together, unraveling the mystery in ways both satisfying and surprising. Carsley's quiet streets held the answers. It was only a matter of following the connections carefully laid out before her. With a final, deliberate breath, Agatha tapped her notebook closed. The puzzle was coming together, every observation and discovery now part of a coherent whole. The tension, the intrigue, and the gentle humour of village life would soon converge into clarity, and Agatha Raisin, with her keen eye and ever-curious mind, was ready to follow that clarity to its inevitable, intriguing conclusion. The village of Carsley lay quiet under a deep velvet sky, the stars faintly glittering as a soft wind rustled through the trees. Agatha sat by her sitting-room window, a steaming cup of chamomile tea cradled in her hands, candlelight casting a gentle glow over the papers and sketches spread before her. The stillness of the night wrapped around her like a comforting blanket, yet her mind was alert, sifting through every observation, every cryptic note, every subtle gesture the silent witness had recorded. She revisited the witness's sketches, their delicate lines and careful annotations seeming almost alive in the soft lamplight. One corner, in particular, caught her attention, a series of tiny marks and arrows that had initially seemed decorative or incidental. Agatha leaned closer, her fingers tracing the careful movements, and suddenly the pattern clicked into place. It wasn't random, it was a sequence, a map of glances, movements, and silent communications, pointing unmistakably to a specific individual and their recent activities. Agatha allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. The quiet triumph was intoxicating, not the rush of danger but the gentle thrill of connecting invisible threads. Each observation by the silent witness, once seemingly minor, now revealed itself as essential. The person she had observed so discreetly had unwittingly left a trail, invisible to most, but illuminated by Agatha's careful reasoning. She sipped her tea, letting the warmth seep into her hands and her thoughts, savouring the satisfaction of understanding a hidden message that had eluded others. A subtle chuckle escaped her lips. It amused her how the quietest villages often held the most telling clues. The witness's subtle gestures, barely noticeable, had been overlooked by the hurried, the distracted, and the self-assured. Yet Agatha's patience and attention had turned these faint signs into revelation. It was a moment both intellectually thrilling and quietly heartening, a testament to her persistence and the gentle rewards of careful observation. She leaned back in her chair, reflecting on the interconnected puzzle, the coded letter, the ledger, Lady Beatrice's inadvertent confession, the garden signals and the attic letters. Each piece had contributed to a tapestry of subtle intrigue, but the silent witness's contribution had now illuminated the critical thread, the one that tied together motive, opportunity, and observation. Carsley's quiet charm, its cobblestone lanes and whispering gardens, had concealed layers of complexity that now began to emerge with clarity. The moonlight spilled softly across the floorboards, brushing the edges of her notebooks and casting elongated shadows from the furniture. Agatha's eyes darted from sketch to sketch, piecing together the final connections. She allowed herself a moment to enjoy the rhythm of deduction, the interplay between careful reasoning and the cozy calm of her surroundings. Even as the stakes remained high, the night itself was gentle, offering a quiet sanctuary in which her mind could work freely. Agatha's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. The revelation was not explosive, nor did it involve dramatic confrontations. It was a subtle, elegant twist, a solution arising from observation, patience, and perception. She appreciated the irony. The silent witness, quiet and unobtrusive, had become the key to unraveling a complex web that had mystified much of the village. There was satisfaction in seeing the invisible made visible through careful attention, and amusement in recognizing how easily others had overlooked the same clues. As the candle flickered low, she gathered the sketches and notes, arranging them neatly for tomorrow's confrontation. The pieces were aligned, the threads woven together, and the final picture now clear in her mind. Agatha Raisin allowed herself a final deep breath, feeling the gentle thrill of triumph mingled with the calm of a cozy night. Carsley's secrets had revealed themselves, patiently, quietly, and now, undeniably. With a last sip of tea and a wry glance at the moonlit garden beyond, she murmured softly to herself, "Sometimes the quietest voices tell the loudest truths." Settling back into her chair, Agatha felt both relief and anticipation, knowing the final chapter of discovery and resolution was only moments away. Chapter 8. The case concluded. The village hall was abuzz with gentle murmurs as residents of Carsley gathered for what Agatha had promised would be an evening of clarity and conversation. The long oak tables were polished to a soft shine, candles flickering in brass holders, and the scent of fresh scones mingled with the earthy aroma of late autumn leaves drifting through open windows. Agatha stood at the head of the room, notebook in hand, her sharp eyes sweeping across familiar faces, noting the subtle tension, curiosity, and barely contained amusement that danced in their expressions. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice calm yet commanding attention, "I believe the time has come to untangle the threads of our little mystery." A quiet hush fell over the room. Agatha allowed a brief pause, letting the anticipation build just enough to make the eventual reveal satisfying. Every glance, every twitch of a lip was observed and catalogued. The villagers' reactions were as informative as any clue. She began with the ledger, recounting its history, the odd movements surrounding it, and the various coded communications she had uncovered. Agatha wove together the tapestry of events with clarity, guiding her audience through the seemingly mundane observations that had been anything but ordinary. Garden signals, silent sketches, whispered conversations, and notes discovered in attics. The village, she emphasized, was filled with keen eyes and observant hearts. Yet, even the most attentive could miss what happened in quiet corners or behind carefully closed doors. Her gaze settled on a particular figure near the back, someone who had been unusually nervous during the assembly. The person who had the most to gain from secrecy and the most to conceal is— She let her words hang for a moment, enjoying the palpable tension. Mr. Hawthorne. A collective murmur rippled through the hall. Mr. Hawthorne's face turned pale, his hand gripping the edge of the table. Agatha's eyes twinkled as she continued. Mr. Hawthorne acted with a mixture of cunning and caution. He observed the village, manipulated small events, and relied on the assumption that none would notice the subtle patterns of his actions. She detailed his motives carefully: financial envy, a desire to conceal past errors, and a misjudged attempt to control outcomes, tying each element to evidence previously presented. Coded letters, unusual movements in the garden, and interactions with the ledger. The silent witnesses' sketches were displayed next, each line and notation connecting directly to Mr. Hawthorne's movements and timing. Agatha explained how the witness had observed him inconspicuously, how each small gesture had betrayed critical information, and how her careful assembly of these observations brought the truth to light. The villagers leaned closer, murmuring amongst themselves, as they began to see what Agatha had seen for days, the invisible threads made visible. Mr. Hawthorne, now realizing his network of minor deceits had unraveled, attempted to speak, but Agatha's calm yet sharp tone preempted any deflection. "No further explanations are necessary," she said, her wry smile softening the tension. "The evidence is clear, and the web has been untangled." There was a mixture of relief, astonishment, and amusement in the room. The revelation had been dramatic, yet the village's charm and gentle humor had transformed what could have been an anxious confrontation into an engaging, almost theatrical display. Agatha concluded with subtle humor, pointing out the small details that had given away the culprit: the misaligned watering can, the slightly askew rake, and even the faint lavender scent on certain papers. Villagers laughed softly at the cleverness of it all, appreciating both the detective's ingenuity and the quirks of their own community. As the candles flickered, Agatha felt a satisfying calm settle over her. Loose ends had been addressed, curiosity satisfied, and the village restored to its peaceful rhythm. Mr. Hawthorne, now acknowledging the truth with a sheepish nod, seemed less a villain than a human character undone by his own small foibles, a reminder that in Carsley even intrigue carried warmth, humour, and charm. With a final glance around the room, Agatha Raisin allowed herself a moment of gentle pride. The mystery was concluded, the evidence laid bare, and the village once more steeped in cosy normalcy, yet richer for the subtle lessons and quiet observations that had revealed the truth. The fire crackled softly in Agatha's sitting room, casting a warm amber glow across the familiar furniture and stacks of neatly arranged papers. Outside, Carsley's streets lay hushed beneath a blanket of twilight, and the occasional hoot of an owl punctuated the peaceful evening. Agatha stretched slightly in her favourite armchair, the events of the past days replaying in her mind like a film edited with care. The resolution of the case had brought satisfaction, yet her thoughts lingered on the village itself, the charming chaos, the eccentric residents, and the small, intricate details that always seemed to hint at stories just beneath the surface. She sipped her tea, savouring the warmth as it spread through her. The calmness was a contrast to the tension of recent days, yet Agatha found the balance delightful. Even as she reflected on the culprit, the coded letters, and the silent witnesses' invaluable observations, She allowed herself a quiet smile. The village had revealed its secrets gently, almost coquettishly, and now the delicate equilibrium of castle life seemed restored. Still, she knew that beneath the placid exterior, curiosity and mischief lingered, waiting for the next observant eye to uncover it. Her mind wandered to the silent witness, who had played such a critical role in revealing the truth. Agatha chuckled softly at the thought of someone so quiet, so unobtrusive, holding such power over events. The quiet ones, she murmured to herself, always have the sharpest eyes. She imagined the witness now, sketchbook in hand, silently observing the villagers as they returned to their routines, unaware of the attention paid to them. The thought brought warmth, amusement, and a gentle reminder that stories in Carsley were ongoing, layered, and endlessly intriguing. Agatha's gaze drifted to the hearth, where the firelight danced across the polished wood, throwing playful shadows onto the walls. Each flicker seemed to echo the tiny clues and moments that had shaped the case, the scuffed floorboards in Holloway Manor, the subtle notches on the garden rake, the half-opened gates, and the whisper of letters hidden in attics. She allowed herself to linger on these memories, savouring the cleverness of the village's secrets and the quiet satisfaction of having unravelled them. There was humour, too, in the recollection of villagers' reactions, the wide eyes of Mr. Hawthorne, the whispered gasps of the townsfolk during the hall reveal, Lady Beatrice's flustered lace handkerchief moments, and even the bemused expression of the baker when confronted with Agatha's subtle observations. Each small interaction had added colour and amusement, turning tension into charm and keeping the cosy rhythm of the village intact. Agatha noted that mystery and comedy, when carefully balanced, could create the most delightful evenings. As she leaned back, tea in hand, she allowed herself to look forward with gentle curiosity. Carsley had its calm moments, yes, but mysteries rarely disappeared entirely. They simply lay dormant, waiting for perceptive eyes. A faint smile curved her lips as she imagined the next puzzle, the next subtle clue tucked beneath flowers, within letters, or in a neighbour's distracted glance. The village was a living story, and she, as always, was both participant and chronicler. With the fire crackling softly, Agatha set her cup down and allowed the comforting warmth to fill the room. The case was concluded, the threads untangled, and the village restored to its peaceful rhythm. Yet, in the quiet flicker of flames and the soft rustle of evening leaves, there was a promise of stories yet to unfold. Agatha Raisin, ever curious and ever perceptive, would be ready. She leaned forward slightly, resting her chin in her hand, and murmured with a wry grin, "In a village like this, there's always another whisper, another glance, another puzzle waiting patiently for someone willing to notice." Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the gentle sense that Carsley's cosy, curious life would continue to weave small mysteries, waiting for the next observant eye to uncover their secrets.